a lot of times what happens is when you don't pay attention to macroeconomic things and you think that it's my creative, it's my agency, it's my brand, it's my employees, whatever it is, they're not doing what they should be doing, you can make some really, really poor choices based off of a false positive, where actually what could be happening is those teams, that creative, your business could be in a much worse situation if you weren't doing some of those things. Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Unstoppable Marketer podcast. With me, as always, Mark Goldheart. Mark, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. As you can hear, Mark's voice is a little under the weather, hence the reason why we're recording not in studio, in home studios.
Home studio today, but that's
home
good.
Studio today.
Yeah, it works.
But we promised we wouldn't stop, when we couldn't make it into the office or someone was sick, we were like, oh yeah, we can record podcasts in our house. It's 2025.
It is. It's 2025.
It may not be as visually pleasing as the studio, but the content will be very tasteful. Yes?
We hope so, at least.
You can only hope. Can only hope.
We can only hope.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have questions around recent performance of stores.
Yeah.
If you're in the e-commerce world, you probably didn't have a great February. Some did, some didn't, but generally speaking, February was a little more rough. And so it begets the question, why? I think there's a lot of questions out there.
Yep.
But David Herman, who is pretty well known in the D2C world, he's a media buyer. He works with some pretty big companies, and
yep.
He said that he believes that the D2C community tends to ignore these types of comments regarding Target and Walmart missing the kind of February targets.
Yep.
But then he goes on to say, like, two of the biggest retailers in the country are saying it. So why won't some of you consider that it isn't Meta or your agency or your creative?
Yeah.
So it does seem like there is a little bit of a macro trend happening right now. Also, it does appear that there's just uncertainty driving some of these consumer trends out.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know that there are potential tariffs. There's potential geopolitical decisions and events happening that might affect supply chains or whatever you have it. But I think just the average consumer is just kind of unsure of what's going on. And when people are unsure, they usually don't spend as much.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. Also is interesting is that it does appear that Walmart is growing their online sales side, which is an interesting tidbit. But
interesting. But nonetheless, their overall projected spending, consumer spending, is not tracking to where the dozens or hundreds of analysts who probably work for Amazon hoped and suggested it would be.
And another like consumer confidence thing, I guess you could call it, is I know in the auto industry, many are projecting that auto sales are going to be down anywhere from, conservative, or I guess more hopeful estimates are like only 5%, but a lot of people are saying 10 to 15% down year over year.
Yeah.
So yeah, car sales are a little different than what most e-commerce brands are doing, but that just gives you an idea of just kind of overall sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one thing to have Walmart. It's another thing to have Target. And then you kind of start to mix those other things like, the housing market's already been there for a minute. So like, that's nothing new. Car sales have seemed to be trending that way. I feel like car sales trend in similar ways that like housing market does, just because interest rates trend similar to what interest rates are with homes. In some way, I'm no expert at that, but yeah, I think you have these macro things that are very, very important. I think, unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, because as a brand, it's important to understand the macroeconomic things that are happening, because things could be a lot worse, right? So a lot of times what happens is when you don't pay attention to macroeconomic things and you think that it's like what David Herman said, it's my creative, it's my agency, it's my brand, it's my employees, whatever it is, they're not doing what they should be doing, you can make some really, really poor choices based off of a false positive, right? Where actually what could be happening is those teams, that creative, your business could be in a much worse situation if you weren't doing some of those things, right? So that's why we want to bring this up, is because, we know that there's a lot of e-commerce brands who listen to this, and sometimes you're not, you get kind of stuck and caught in your own world, and maybe you've got another founder friend or whatever, or maybe you are working with an agency who runs 20 other brands and maybe they're explaining this to you, but sometimes it doesn't seem as trustworthy coming from an agency, right? It shouldn't be that way. But unfortunately, people have some stigmatisms towards agencies. We're like, oh, when performance is down, of course the agency is going to blame it on a macroeconomic thing. And some agencies will do that when they shouldn't be. But I think it's an important topic to discuss, to say, okay, cool. Well, it has to be addressed. It has to be acknowledged so that you don't go making poor business decisions. The next question is, where do you go from here? Like what should you do?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a few examples of what some bigger companies are doing. I mean, Nike has taken a hit, at least their stock has, over the last 4 years. They reached highs in 2020 and then have since fallen. But
yeah, they announced I think they announced their revenue was down 10% in 2024. That was an announcement that was made.
And they just announced a pretty big time partnership, which is actually unprecedented. And we'll explain why.
Yeah. Yeah. The partnership was with Skims, right? Which is Kim Kardashian's brand, which is worth what? What did you say it was worth when we were looking? Was it 5 billion, 6 billion?
I don't know what it's worth now. I mean, the last article I saw was 4 billion in 2023. So maybe 5, 4, 6. I don't know.
Yeah. And maybe even more now that they've announced that
but they're privately held. So
yeah,
it's hard to know.
Yeah. So why is that unprecedented? Explain that.
Well, it's unprecedented for Nike because Nike has never, as far as I know, and for what I could read, they have never had a partnership with another brand. They've only had partnerships with product lines or designers.
And athletes, obviously.
Yeah, and they've had some licensing deals they've done with some other brands, where they let some smaller brands use some of their products and design them and stuff like that, right? I'm trying to think of what that company was called. There was a golf company that did it in the boutique space. They had a Nike or Air Jordan deal.
Oh, Eastside Golf.
I think it was it Eastside?
Yeah, they did a collaboration with Jordan. Yeah. So Eastside Golf, yeah.
So they've done little things like that, but they've never really done a big time brand time, Nike times whatever collaboration. Yeah. So this is a full on, not acquisition yet. I mean, I'm sure that they want to, but right now, I mean, this is a full on announced collaboration. For example, we know that Nike was technically partnered with, I believe, Kizik's parent company, right? They were investors in it for the slip-on shoe technology.
Yeah, they licensed the hands-free technology.
But that wasn't, that's more of a technology, a product line, not a full-on brand-to-brand collaboration.
Yeah, where this is going to be, what's interesting about this is what it sounds like from what I've read is, so the the product line won't hit until I believe spring is what they announced. So they announced it end of February. immediately, by the way, saw like a $6.7 billion increase in valuation. Like instantaneously saw that. Like I said, Mark said it, Skims isn't public, and so you can't really see what it did for Skims. So it immediately made up some of that ground of that they've been losing. But it's supposed to be a full product line for women. So like what it almost seemed like to me, what I was reading is like Nike, for example, outfits the Olympic athletes. Like so the women's track outfits, like those, like the only way I know how to describe them is they look like leotards to me. They're running like leotards, like that seems like it's going to be right up the alley of like, hey, Skims, the whole purpose of what Skims does is it helps women, it helps for there's several things that Skims does, but one of the things is like it makes things a little bit more form fitting, tightens things up, which seems like a very, very, like that type of technology seems like it could be very great for athletes as well, who don't want the looser, baggier things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I looked up Skims and it does appear that Nike's strategy here is they've lost a lot of the athleisure market over the last 10 years.
Big time. Like
especially
even,
for women.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, that's what some analysts are saying, which I guess, I don't know, they might know more than me, but like I look at Skims and I don't really, like, because that's not really athleisure. It's like just seems like underwear.
Well, it's I think Skims started in the underwear space, like the undergarment space, right? Because some of it was bodysuits, and now they have entered into like the apparel space. So pajamas and dresses and things that women would wear outside. Like you would noticeably, like I think in the early days, Skims was meant to not notice that you were wearing Skims. And now they do have some product that very much is outwardly like, oh, that's a Skims product. So I don't know a whole ton about it.
Skims says that they are the next generation of underwear, loungewear, and shapewear. But as far as we know from this collaboration, they are creating a new brand or product line, which probably does make sense. Like it's going to go after more of like athleisure, taking whatever Skims has figured out about, on skin type of fabric, and a lot of athleisure is on skin, right? Like, so whatever that means, people are taking very positively to it. They're thinking it's going to be a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and I think it's a super smart collaboration because I think, like you said, the women's athleisure market has been dominated by, well, I shouldn't say been dominated, because if you look at like Lululemon, Nike is worth significantly more than Lululemon. However, I think Lululemon, when you say 10 years ago, were the people who started eating into that like athleisure, athletic wear market that Nike had primarily owned. And then over the last 5 years, you've got Vuori that has stepped in and eat up a ton of the market. What did they just got announced at like $5 billion.
Yeah.
I think Lulu's like 40 billion, Vuori's 5 billion, right? And when Nike, what did you look at Nike? Is it worth like 100 something billion? 140 billion?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Nike is like 160, if I remember right, is their market cap. But Lululemon it's not that far behind. I mean, is it 40 to 50 billion?
Yeah, so, exactly.
I mean,
but yeah, when you get 40 billion, like that's a lot of market share that they've taken. And not all those people were Nike customers. Same thing with Vuori. When they're at 5 billion, not everyone was a Nike customer, but in theory, every one of those people could be Nike customers. So I think it's a really awesome, I love the collaboration. And what's really nice, and the reason why we want to tie this to this macroeconomic discussion is, unfortunately, you oftentimes cannot predict when a big macroeconomic issue is going to happen, right? This one has been almost kind of like a long time coming, right? Like ever since COVID, it's like things have been just with president, an election year. You've got these tariffs. You've got you go from a Democratic presidency to a Republican, right? So there's just so many like big changes that have happened over the last 4 years that this one seems like a little bit more like, hey, we've all been kind of like waiting for something. We've all been feeling it. But, you take a COVID, for example, and you just have like no one was planning. No one knew. So many businesses went under because of it. And sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. A macroeconomic thing can crush you. But what I love about this Skims, like what I'm going to be really excited to hear from Kim Kardashian or Nike executives, whenever somebody's on a podcast or get interviewed or when it launches, like I'm curious on how long in the making this has been. Has this been, because it's got to be over a 12-month thing, just with how product development works and all that kind of stuff. And there's a good chance that it could be even longer than that. So I love this because it's a very offensive strategy. And what's interesting is that the consumer spending reports are down across the board, yet Nike just added $6 billion to their market share. And once they launch, it's going to be another massive, what seems like it's going to be, end of Q1 to, early Q2. That they're probably going to do better than they were projecting. So the point I'm trying to make is, I think that a lot of brands, and we've worked on the brand side and we work with brands all the time, get very comfortable in the very predictable success that they can have. And when I say predictable success, like, hey, I know that when I'm sending out X amount of emails, I'm getting X amount of returning customers that bring me X amount of revenue. I know that if I spend $100,000 a month or $500,000 a month in ad spend on Meta, I'm going to generally be somewhere around this kind of revenue space. So we get very safe in those worlds. Now, a lot of brands will make risky moves to say, okay, I'm going to jump. How do I go from spending $100,000 to $200,000 in the next month or so? That can be oftentimes risky. When I say risky, I just mean like, oh, that's a big jump, right? I'm doubling my spend. But there's these things that I don't oftentimes feel brands are trying to work on behind the scenes that may not give immediate results, but are going to be the things that build the brand and get people to start coming back tomorrow versus just today. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's just a longer term brand building effort. And I think what's interesting from this perspective for Nike is if Nike's willing to collaborate with a new brand, right? This has to be a win-win. So it's got to be a win for them and it's got to be a win for Skims, right? Like that nobody's going to make this partnership if it's going to be a bad result. So yep. I think Skims is going to come out the bigger quote winner of this trade, but this trade is going to be a win-win. I mean, Nike's going to win, Skims is going to win. And then the other interesting thing is in the e-commerce world, it's allowed so many brands to appear. So D2C has created really an inundation of brands, especially around certain product or market categories. And I think what Nike is recognizing now, right? So Lululemon's grown to 50 $40 to $50 billion market valuation, like whatever Viore is now, whatever, is it Ola?
Oh,
Aloe.
Yeah, Aloe, On Running, like
Aloe, whatever
those are
all these
big ones
companies
that
are.
yeah.
But guess what? That actually gives Nike the opportunity to come in and reestablish themselves, right? Because there's a lot of indecision. If people are willing to jump from Lululemon to a Viore to an Aloe or whatever, right? Everyone's just jumping brand to brand to brand. So then Nike is probably saying, hey, this is our opportunity to partner with one that we want and one that hasn't eaten into our market share yet, which is going to be Skims.
Yeah.
And say, let's reestablish ourselves as the go-to for whatever this product line is going to be, which obviously I think we're all assuming is going to be somewhere on the athleisure side. So props to Nike. I mean, they're going to be taking advantage of this opening here because there's a lot of sifting going on with brands and product decisions. And we're in a time of uncertainty in the economy, and sometimes people are going to be less willing to take risks. So they're saying, hey, let's reestablish ourselves. But again, collaborations can be win-win. It's not going to be a lose-win situation. I mean, when you're establishing a partnership for a collaboration with another company, do what Nike did. You're looking for someone who's not cannibalizing you. They're not eating into you in your market. They're going to be able to help you reach new people. They already have an established brand identity, right? I think some people might think that Skims and Nike might not have a good brand cohesion there, but it's good enough, right? So if Nike can do it, you can do it. Just make sure that you're being smart about who you want to partner with and make sure that it's not going to eat into your existing audience, and it's going to help you establish roadways into new audiences.
Yeah, I think something you said that I thought was interesting is Nike is significantly bigger than Skims from a valuation perspective. Yet Nike's...
Well, from an everything perspective, yeah.
Yeah. Yet Nike collaborated with Skims. So I think something that I hear all the time when we talk to people about, hey, you should do a collaboration. Like it's very interesting. We work with pretty big brands, but we also love taking on we have a pool when we consult of like smaller companies that are emerging, that have the ability to make it big, but they just haven't quite figured out how to do it. And when we have conversations with smaller companies, it's fun. A lot of times they're like, oh, we think this would be a cool collaboration, but they're so much bigger than us. Why would they want to do it? And then on the flip side, we talk to these bigger brands and they almost think that they're too big to collaborate with somebody smaller. And so I think a very interesting lesson in this partnership is it doesn't always matter about the size, and how much revenue a company is making. What matters is what you can bring to the table for them and what they can bring to the table for you, So if you're a brand that's doing $50 million a year, let's say you're I'm just making something up here. Let's say you are a bedding company or like a mattress company, you're a company in the sleep space. Okay. And you're this 50 plus to $100 million company, but there is a brand that's emerging that may be in the, $5 to $10 million space. That is a supplement company, selling sleep aid kind of supplements, what a cool collaboration that would be. Because you're not eating into market share, number one. And number two, you're connecting with an audience that is going to be very loyal, who understands how important sleep is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a win-win for both, because in the CPG space, you have very, very loyalists because these people are subscribing over and over and over again. That's the type of value that you could bring to to a bigger, larger bedding, mattress, whatever company. And on the flip side, this bigger company just has more customers that have deeper wallets that also are very interested in sleep. And so there is this very symbiotic relationship, even though on paper, one looks like they could be much more valuable than the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is exactly how Nike and Skims are.
Yeah, it is. And so it's going to give both of them a ton of new content to work with. It's going to give new eyes to both brands. It's going to help both of them break into a new category potentially. So that's I think it's smart. It's really smart right now. I mean, yes. And the flip side of a lot of competition is that there's a lot of uncertainty, or there's maybe more indecision, and there's more opportunity for you to, well, let me rephrase that. There's more uncertainty and indecision from a consumer standpoint, but that might be actually more opportunity for a brand to establish themselves.
Yeah.
So if you can zig while others are zagging, then you can actually emerge on top during these kinds of situations. Because guess what? Like, economies ebb and flow. Like, this is just business. Like, everything does not move in a linear direction. So if you're running a company, I'm not saying you shouldn't be frustrated, but this is just life.
Right.
Like, every company has gone up and down. And so the important thing is just trying to raise your basement, right? So if you can make sure that your bottoms are getting higher, and if you could start getting more efficient, fixing your operations, finding new ways to do outreach like collaborations, then great. Like, that doesn't mean that you can stop doing the things that you have to do that are the bloodline of your business, but collaborations are so easy. And that, now, yes, working with other people might not be always easy, but a collaboration generally is a phone call. There's not a ton of upfront money involved. It's not a lot of pain like it is to invest perhaps 300 grand into certain kinds of video content that you might not know if it's going to pan out or not, right? Like, sometimes that can be really painful, and sometimes collaborations will involve that kind of content. But if you're a smaller brand, and when I say smaller, if you're 5, even lower than that, if you're 1 to 15 million, it doesn't, like, all you have to do is call another company. Just make some phone calls. See which companies make sense for you.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal, right? And like, you'll be surprised how quickly you can do it, because like, it's not just with other companies, it's with potentially with like an influencer, and like, this isn't you having to go and do a ton of work. It's just putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and because oftentimes what happens is it's taking existing products and tailoring it to the collaboration, right? So yes, there's time involved in the sense that, like, hey, if your lead times to create product are 3 months or 6 months or whatever, yes, there's time there. But you're right. It's just it's DMs away. I get so many people who, I'll post content about collaborating, and so many people will be like, well, this isn't always like guaranteed to win, and it's like, yeah, you are 100% right. However, that's why you stick with the ABCs, the guarantees, or when, obviously nothing's guaranteed, meaning like if you send an email out, you're not guaranteed to make X amount of sales. If you spend $100,000 in ads, you're not guaranteed to make 400,000 back. But there are these ABCs, these things that you are pretty constant, and that within a margin of error, you're going to get X amount of return on that. That's why you do collaborations, because, or product seeding, or new product development. I mean, whatever the situation is, we're talking about collaborations here, is you do those things because in order to grow, in order to build your brand, you have to do more than just run ads. You have to. Yes, that's going to help you grow, and you can do very, very cool things, and you can enter into new channels and run more top of funnel stuff that will also build your brand. But tying yourself to another audience and borrowing that audience is just another thing that's going to help do those things. And yes, it might not always land and it might not always be a home run the way it seems like this Skims collaboration is going to be. But does that mean you don't do it? No.
Yeah, a good example of this would be from a lower, and I don't know what their revenue is, but I'm guessing what Lola blankets might be, but they collaborated with Teza. And if you're just looking from the outside in, you look at Instagram and you're looking at like a Lola blankets and you might think like, oh, like they're just a small blanket company. Like why would Teza, who has 1 point whatever million followers, collaborate? Like I'm not saying, I'm saying that from the perspective of that's what a lot of people end up doing.
Right.
Right. A lot of companies will be like, oh, well, I don't know if I can get her or that person or that company.
Because,
but obviously that was a beneficial move for both of them.
Yep. Yeah. And they just like, it was beneficial because they just restocked.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw that. Like they restocked it. So that she was probably making good money from it and they probably made good money from it.
Yeah. And it worked out for both of them. So it's a win-win.
Yep.
And I don't know how much time and effort went into that. And probably everything's always harder. Everything's easier said than done. So it's harder than what we're making it out to be. But still, like Lola makes blankets. They made a blanket together. They didn't necessarily like come out with this whole new product. I'm sure Teza had a lot of influence on what that style looked like and what she wanted to have her name on. But a lot of times that relationship is just simply you sending out different product samples and just like, hey, what do you want? What have you seen? What inspirations?
These colorways, these patterns,
And so that can be difficult and that's work, but it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel there.
No.
Like Lola knows how to make blankets. So like making a variation of a blanket with someone like a Teza probably wasn't rocket science, right? It probably wasn't like that crazy. Yeah. So, and it was great for both of them and we're happy for both of them. And we've had him on our podcast. We're stoked that we're seeing them all over the place. So good example of like, going back to the Skims to Nike, like why would Nike partner with someone so tiny in comparison to Nike?
Yep.
Well, so don't think of that terms of like, oh, we're small, they're big. Think of it of like, hey, you might have something that a bigger brand doesn't have. Like you might have an influencer, you might have, right, a certain target demographic. Like you might have something that they don't.
Yep.
And that they want. So like never think of it as like big versus small. Think of it as like where can we both win?
Yep. Yeah. Can I provide value to this person? I like somebody once told me like, when I was like early on in my career, this guy was telling me, he said, hey, one of my biggest pet peeves, he was further on, he was a CMO for this bigger brand. And he said, one of my biggest pet peeves is when like some random person reaches out to me and says, hey, can I pick your brain? I want to talk about marketing. Can I pick your brain? And he says, it's not that I'm not willing to answer questions and help young people. He's like, but the laziness and not being able to come to me with the value you could bring to me, and I'm not expecting that this kid who's in college, who's never done anything, is going to provide me massive value, but just in everything, just think about the value you can bring. Right. And so, I remember I used to say stuff like, hey, I would love to pick your brain and I'd love to do a little bit of work for you on the side. Like if you need extra hands, I'll do it for free. Like I just want the experience. And so it was me like, hey, I would love to go to lunch with you, ask some questions, but I'm also willing to like step into your office and help you do X, Y, Z, So there's always that's kind of how you have to look, is like, what is the value you can bring to them and what's the value they can bring to you? And yes, some might come out on top more than others. But that doesn't mean that they're going to say no just because their value isn't going to be like the value they're going to get out of you isn't going to be equal to the value they're going to give to you.
Yeah, someone's going to be a bigger winner, but like if it's a win-win, then do it. It's never going to be equal.
Yep. And these things take a little bit of time too, right? So remember that, like, that's what's beauty. Like this, like, yes, I know we've kind of downplayed it and say it's a conversation away, because it is, right? Like that's just how it starts. Is it starts with a DM, it starts with a text message, it starts with a phone call, it starts with you're at an event and you approaching somebody or whatever it is. So it always starts with a conversation, and sometimes these things take a little bit of time, but that's why you have to be doing them right now. Like that's why when things are going well, you shouldn't just sit back and do the ABCs. You should sit back and say, okay, like how do we get to the XYZs, you know, and do the things that, God, I don't know if it's going to work, but let's put time and let's put some resource into this so that come, you know, next spring or fall, we're going to win. I mean, we had a client who did this last fall. Like it was really cool. They had like 4 or 5, it was maybe like 2 to 4 collaborations set up, I think in October. And Octobers are generally bad months in the apparel space, as people are waiting for Black Friday. And they had one of their best months of the year in October, because they had these collaborations that absolutely crushed. Then now they were smaller collabs, but they had like these collabs drop all in the same month, and it essentially gave them an extra month's worth of revenue. So instead of having a 12-month year, they had a 13-month year, based off of the revenue. And so these things can help out in also struggling times and situations. So you got to start DMing, you got to start asking, and understand that it might take 6 months, it might take 12 months. Like I said, I bet the Skims thing has been a deal that's been happening for the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, or even longer.
Yeah,
which meant that Skims would have been valued at less at the time, right? Most likely.
Yeah, hard to know with
valuation. In theory, yes, right.
But nonetheless, yeah. All right. So
I like that. I mean,
that's good.
Offensive strategies, so that when you have macro things that you can't control, you have other things that you can lean on, right? And not just the 1-2 punch that you lead with. You've got something that you can pull out of your hat. I think that's important. I think the other thing that's super important is just follow some macroeconomic things, because I think, yes, I know we talked about doing some offensive things like collaborations, but also something that's just like super critical is sometimes we make really bad emotional decisions when it's just a time in a season, right? Hey, let me fire this marketing agency, or hey, let me stop spending, because my CAC went from $50 to $70. Sometimes we can make really bad decisions, even though if we were to, because we think it's somebody else's problem, not something more macro. Whereas if you were to turn your spending off, it could actually completely kill you in the next couple of months. Or if you were to fire your agency, they were actually doing good, but you were putting it up against a macroeconomic thing, and then you hire another agency who actually sucks, right? So when you're not following the macroeconomic things, you could be putting yourself in a really poor situation.
Yeah, for sure. Don't make emotionally based decisions. All right, sweet. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks you guys.
Thanks everybody.
Sorry we're in the home office today, but we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for listening to the Unstoppable Marketer podcast. Please go rate and subscribe the podcast, whether it's good or bad. We want to hear from you, because we always want to make this podcast better. If you want to get in touch with me or give me any direct feedback, please go follow me and get in touch with me. I am at the Trevor Crump on both Instagram and TikTok. Thank you, and we will see you next week.